For years she waited in the dark until a human warrior appeared. Kira had been trapped in the underground prison for so long that she forgot what sunlight felt like on her silver skin, and her people, the Valari, had abandoned her after the Great War ended and peace treaties were signed, and she was left behind in the enemy facility deep beneath the frozen moon of Arcturus Prime. The cell was small and cold, and the only light came from a dim panel that flickered every few hours, and she counted the days by the meals that arrived through a slot in the door. And when she reached 10,000 meals, she stopped counting because hope had died in her chest. Her crime was simple, and she had refused to surrender when her commanders ordered retreat, and she fought alone against an entire battalion to buy time for her wounded squad to escape, and the enemy captured her and labeled her too dangerous to release and too valuable to kill. The Valari were known across the galaxy for their warriors, and the females were the fiercest of all. And Kira had been one of the best, and her silver skin could harden like metal in battle, and her strength could crush steel, and her speed made her blur to most species. But now she sat in darkness, and her powers useless against walls that absorbed all force. She meditated often and remembered her homeworld with its purple skies and crystal forests. And she thought of her sister Maya, who was probably leading fleets now, and she wondered if anyone remembered her name or if she had become just another casualty listed in old war records. Then one day the facility shook. Explosions rattled the walls, and alarms screamed through the corridors, and she heard gunfire and shouting in languages she had not heard in years, and she stood and pressed her hands against the door and wondered if this was finally the end. The sounds grew closer, and she heard heavy boots running and more gunfire and then silence. And she waited, and her heart's pounding in her chest, and Valari had two hearts, and both raced with something she had not felt in years, in anticipation. The door exploded inward, and she shielded her face from the debris, and when she looked up, she saw him. He was human, and wearing black armor covered in dust and burn marks, and his weapon was raised, and his eyes were sharp behind his helmet visor. And humans were new to the galactic stage, and young and reckless and brave in ways that older species had forgotten. He stared at her, and she stared back, and her silver skin caught the light from his helmet lamper. "You Kira of the Valari?" And he asked, and his voice was rough and tired. She nodded slowly and unable to speak, and her voice had gone unused for so long. He lowered his weapon. "And we have been looking for you for 3 years, and come on, and we are getting out of here." She did not move. And why? He pulled off his helmet, and his face was young but scarred, and his dark hair was matted with sweat. "And because your sister, Maya, sent us, and she never stopped searching, and she hired my team when the official channels gave up and now move, and we have got 10 minutes before this place comes down." Something broke inside her, and not in pain but in relief, and Maya had not forgotten, and her sister had sent warriors to find her, and she stepped forward, and her legs shaky after years of stillness. The human, whose name was Jake, grabbed her arm to steady her, and his touch was warm through his glove. "And you good to run?" And he asked. She nodded and pulled strength from the deep places inside her where her warrior spirit still lived. "And I can run." They moved through corridors filled with smoke, and past bodies of guards who had kept her imprisoned, and she felt no pity and only cold satisfaction. And Jake and his team moved like shadows, and professional and efficient and deadly. They reached the surface, and the frozen air hit her face, and she gasped, and breathing real air for the first time in years. And the sky above was black and filled with stars, and she wanted to cry, but warriors did not cry. And she had been taught. A ship waited, and small and fast, and they ran across the ice, and enemy forces were regrouping behind them and firing, and Jake and his team returned fire and covering her as she ran. "Get her on board," and Jake shouted to his teammates. She stumbled up the ramp, and her body weak from captivity, and Jake was right behind her, and the ramp closed, and the ship lifted and accelerated, hard and throwing her against the wall. Jake caught her, and easy, "And you are safe now." She looked at him, and this human who had walked into hell to find her, "And who are you?" He smiled, and tired but genuine. "And just a guy who does not leave people behind. And your sister paid well, but honestly, I would have done this one for free, and what they did to you and keeping you locked up after the war ended, and that is not right." The ship jumped to faster than light speed, and the stars stretched, and she felt the weight of years lifting. "And where are we going?" "Home," and Jake said, "and Maya is waiting." Kira closed her eyes and the word tasted strange and sweet and home. The journey took days, and she recovered slowly, and eating real food and exercising. In the ship's small cargo bay and her strength returning, and Jake watched over her and bringing her meals and talking about simple things and his team and his home on Earth and his reasons for becoming what he called a freelance rescue operator. She learned that humans were good at stubbornness, and at refusing to accept when something was impossible, and at fighting for those who could not fight for themselves. Why did you really come? And she asked him one night as they sat in the observation deck and watching stars stream past. He was quiet for a long time, and I lost someone once, and my brother and he was captured during a border conflict. And by the time anyone decided to act, it was too late. And so now when someone needs help, and when the official answer is no, and I make sure the real answer is yes, she understood, and warriors carried their dead with them always. When they arrived at the Valari homeworld, Maya was waiting at the spaceport, and she ran to Kira and her sister, and her commander and her family, and they held each other, and both finally allowing tears. Jake and his team prepared to leave, and payment transferred, and mission complete. Kira found him at his ship, and wait, he turned, and yeah, come back, and she said, and when you need help, and when Earth needs allies, and when you face impossible things, and call for me, and I do not leave people behind either. He smiled, and that same tired, genuine smile and deal. She watched his ship lift into the purple sky, and this human warrior who had pulled her from darkness, and she knew their paths would cross again. And in a galaxy that needed people who refused to give up, and who fought for what was right, and who remembered those left behind. Kira looked at her sister, and at her home, and at the crystal forests glowing in the distance, and she was free, and she was home, and she was ready to be a warrior again. And somewhere in the stars, Jake flew toward his next impossible mission, and knowing that when he called, the Valari would answer.